She had lost everything: her daughter, her grandson, her will to celebrate Easter. But when Betty Carson opened her door to two frightened children, something stirred inside her. A quiet boy, a stuffed bunny, and a mother's final plea. What began as a simple act of kindness turned into the fight of her life. Want to know what happened? Watch until the end and don't miss this story full of emotion and unexpected twists. Also, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more heart-touching stories like this one. It was Easter Sunday, but the house was quiet, too quiet. No scent of baked ham, no clatter of dishes, no children's laughter echoing through the halls like it used to. Betty Carson stood in her modest kitchen, staring at a dust-covered photo frame. In it, her daughter and grandson beamed, their faces frozen in joy from a happier time. That photo was 5 years old now, the same number of years they'd been gone. A car accident, a phone call, a silence that had never quite lifted. Outside, the town dozed beneath a cloudy sky, the kind of sleepy Sunday where the world moved slower. Betty had gone to the market earlier, just out of habit. A carton of milk, a loaf of bread, some tea. She didn't need much, just enough to keep the silence company. As she crossed back toward her little blue house, something caught her eye. At the bus stop across the street, two small figures sat huddled together. A boy, maybe 10 years old, held a little girl, no older than 4, close against the chill. She wore a pink sweater 2 sizes too big, and beside her sat a small stuffed rabbit with a bow. Betty slowed. She wasn't the type to intrude, but something tugged at her, an ache she couldn't ignore. She stepped closer, heart cautious but curious. "Are you two all right?" she asked, voice gentle, as if trying not to startle a bird. The boy looked up. His eyes were dark and tired, far too tired for someone so young. "Our mum's coming soon," he said, flatly, like he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. Betty didn't believe it. Not for a second. She hesitated, then, "Would you like to come in just for a bit? It's cold out." "I can make something warm to eat." The children glanced at one another. The girl didn't speak. She clutched the rabbit tighter. After a long pause, the boy gave a small nod. Betty led them to her front porch, unsure of what she was doing, only certain that she couldn't leave them there. The door opened with a creak, and suddenly the quiet house didn't feel quite so empty. That night, as soup simmered on the stove and the children settled at the table, Betty saw something poking from the rabbit's belly. A slip of paper, worn and crumpled. She unfolded it slowly, and her heart skipped. "If someone finds my kids, please keep them safe. Their father is dangerous. Don't let him take them. Michelle." Steam curled from the bowls on the table as Betty sat across from the children, her hands trembling slightly around her spoon. The girl, still clutching her bunny, barely touched the soup, while the boy, Asher, he'd said his name was, watched Betty with a cautious, flickering gaze. Trust didn't come easy. That much was clear. She hadn't mentioned the letter yet. The note tucked inside the stuffed rabbit was still folded in her apron pocket, like a secret burning through the fabric. Every time her fingers brushed it, a chill ran down her spine. There was so much she didn't know. Who was Michelle? Was she their mother? And if the father was truly dangerous, where was he now? After dinner, Betty set up the spare bedroom. The girl, her name was Kimberly, Asher whispered, didn't want to sleep without her brother. So, Betty laid out thick quilts on the floor beside the bed and tucked them both in. The girl fell, asleep quickly, her little body finally at rest. Asher, however, lay still, eyes wide open in the dark. She stood in the doorway, unsure whether to speak. "You don't have to be afraid here," she said softly. He didn't answer right away. Then, just as she was about to step away, he whispered, "She told us to run. She said if anything happened to her, we had to keep going." Betty's heart ached. "Do you know where she went?" He shook his head. "She said she had to find someone to help us. But she never came back. There was no handbook for this. No manual that told you what to do when 2 scared children showed up with a letter that changed everything. Betty should have called someone. Authorities, child services. That's what anyone else would have done. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed up that night, sitting by the fireplace with a cup of tea gone cold, the letter lying open in front of her. The handwriting was neat but rushed, the ink smudged in one corner like it had been gripped too tightly in a moment of panic. Her instincts battled her logic, but something inside her, something ancient, maternal, fierce, had already made the choice. For now they would stay. By morning, the air inside the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if the shadows that had clung to the corners for years had loosened their grip. Betty stood at the stove, flipping pancakes the way she used to on Sundays, when laughter still echoed down the hallway. She hadn't made them in years. Not since. The scent lured the children into the kitchen, sleepy-eyed and wary. Kimberly shuffled in first, clutching her bunny like a lifeline. Asher followed, his posture still protective, still uncertain. But when Betty slid, a plate in front of them, golden pancakes shaped like bunny ears, syrup drizzled in a careful spiral, something changed. Not much, just a tiny shift. Asher mumbled, "Thanks," barely audible. Kimberly giggled softly at the shape. That sound, the smallest laugh, hit Betty straight in the chest. They stayed through the weekend. One day turned into 2, and then 3. Betty didn't ask too many questions. She gave them space, warmth, and something else they hadn't had in a while, routine. Clean clothes, bedtime stories, a reason to brush their teeth. But questions came anyway. Neighbors noticed the children. Mrs. Latimer across the street waved from her porch one afternoon and called out, "You've got grandkids visiting, Betty?" Betty smiled and nodded, saying nothing more. Let them wonder. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Betty stood in the living room staring at the letter again. Michelle's plea haunted her. She'd signed it like a goodbye. But there were no dates, no phone numbers, no way to trace it. The right thing and the official thing, when was still clear: call social services, report the children, let the system take it from here. But every time she picked up the phone, she couldn't do it. They were healing. She saw it in the way Kimberly began humming while coloring, in how Asher's shoulders slowly dropped when he read on the couch, not flinching at every creak. She had made a silent promise to a woman she'd never met, folded inside a rabbit's belly, and Betty Carson had never broken a promise in her life. Spring crept gently through the town, brushing green onto tree, branches and sending birds fluttering along the fences. Inside Betty's home, days began to carry a quiet rhythm. Breakfast at 8, cartoons on the couch, stories before bed. It was fragile, yes, temporary maybe, but it was real. Then came the knock. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the kitchen window when it echoed through the hallway. Sharp, sudden, official. Betty's heart skipped as she wiped her hands on a towel. Asher froze in the doorway, instinctively placing himself in front of Kimberly. She clutched her bunny tighter. Standing. On the porch was a young woman in a neat blazer, a clipboard tucked under one arm. She introduced herself as Patricia. Patricia Langley, she added with a kind smile. A social worker. She'd received an anonymous tip about 2 missing children. The description matched. Betty's fingers curled tightly around the doorknob. "I'm not here to take them away," the woman said quickly, sensing the tension. "I just want to talk, make sure they're safe." Betty stepped aside slowly. She didn't want to, but something in Patricia's eyes was steady and sincere. Inside, she sat at the table, asked gentle questions, never pushed too hard. Asher said little. Kimberly hid behind the table leg. When Patricia finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. "I can tell they trust you," she said, "but you understand the risk you're taking, right? This could get complicated." Betty nodded. "I know, but someone left them with me for a reason." The social worker hesitated, then handed over a card. "Call me, please, before anyone else finds them first." That night the house was quiet again. Not empty, just quiet in a different way. The children were asleep upstairs, but Betty couldn't. She sat in her favorite chair, the card balanced on her knee, the weight of the decision pressing in. She wasn't afraid of the law. What frightened her was the thought of losing them now, letting them fall back into whatever pain they'd fled from. She turned the card over, reading the name again. Patricia Langley. Funny how fate always seemed to send someone kind when the world was at its worst and at its best. Betty didn't sleep much after Patricia's visit. Her mind turned over possibilities like puzzle pieces refusing to fit. Somewhere out there, someone dangerous was looking for these children. And somewhere else, maybe not so far, their mother was missing, or worse. The letter said everything, in so few words yet left too much unsaid. By the end of the week, Patricia returned, this time with more than questions. She had files, a photo of Michelle. Betty recognized her instantly. Same soft eyes as Kimberly, same quiet strength. Patricia confirmed what Betty had feared. Michelle was officially missing. Her car had been found abandoned on a rural road 3 towns over. Inside, only her purse and a half-packed suitcase. No sign of struggle, no sign of her. Patricia placed a folder gently on the table. We believe she was running from the children's father. His name is Gregory Hensley. History of domestic violence, substance abuse, parole violations. He was released from prison 3 months ago. The name hung in the air like smoke. He's filed for custody, Patricia added quietly. Betty's breath caught. He what? He claims Michelle kidnapped them. He's hired a lawyer, says he's sober now, has a job, an apartment. A bitter taste rose in Betty's mouth. She looked toward the staircase, as if she could see them through the walls. Asher helping Kimberly brush her teeth, reading her the same picture book again and again, just because she liked the ending. They're not safe with him, Betty said, voice shaking. I believe you, Patricia replied, but courts want evidence. Without Michelle to testify, and unless Greg makes a mistake, the system leans toward biological ties. Silence settled like dust between them. That evening, Betty didn't tell the children about the visit. She couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she made their favorite macaroni, let them pick a silly movie and tucked Kimberly in with extra pillows. Asher lingered by the door afterward. Is something wrong? He asked. Betty smiled through a storm behind her eyes. No, sweetheart. Everything's okay. But as she turned out the light and sat alone downstairs, she knew everything was about to change, and if she wanted to keep the children safe, she'd have to fight for them. Days blurred into one another as Betty prepared for the hearing. She collected everything she could, drawings the children had made, photos of their smiles returning, the letter Michelle had hidden in the stuffed rabbit. It felt like building a case out of memories and instinct, but she had no choice. If the judge couldn't see what these children meant to her, what they had begun to heal in each other, then the system might tear them apart again. The courthouse was colder than she expected. Long marble halls, the smell of old paper, and older decisions. Patricia met her outside the courtroom, papers tucked under her arm and worry etched across her face. We don't know what Greg's going to say, she murmured. His lawyer is aggressive. If you feel overwhelmed, I can step in. Betty squared her shoulders. No, I need to speak. Inside, the judge listened quietly as arguments began. Greg sat at the other end of the room, well-dressed, clean-shaven, rehearsed. He spoke of redemption, of wanting to reunite his family, of turning his life around. His lawyer echoed it all with smooth confidence. Then Betty took the stand. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the letter Michelle had written. She told the court about finding the children, the nights Kimberly woke up crying, the way Asher flinched at sudden noises, how they'd come to trust again, slowly, gently, how they'd brought life back into her house and into her heart. She spoke of pancakes and scraped knees and laughter, but the judge remained unreadable. Greg's lawyer stood, eyes cold. Mrs. Carson, you admit you failed to report the children immediately. You knowingly kept them hidden. Isn't it true you interfered with lawful custody? Betty didn't flinch. I kept a promise, and I protected them. That's what matters. Still, she could feel the room slipping. Words, memories. None of it seemed enough against polished arguments and legal jargon. Then, from the back of the room, Asher rose. The boy hadn't been asked to speak, but his voice, when it came, was steady. Your Honor, may I say something? Every head turned. Gasps stirred quietly across the courtroom as Asher stepped forward. He wasn't holding anyone's hand. No prompting, no whisper in his ear. Just his voice steady and clear. The judge looked surprised but gestured gently. You may speak. Asher took a breath, standing barely tall enough to reach the microphone. My mom, she said if something happened to her, I should protect my sister. That I should find someone kind, someone who would love us, not just feed us. He turned slightly, looking toward Betty. Miss Betty makes pancakes every Saturday. She reads us stories even when she's tired. She hugs Kimberly when she has bad dreams. She lets me sleep with the light on if I want. She tells us we matter. There was no rehearsed testimony, no legal jargon, just truth, raw and unfiltered, spoken by a child too young to fake any of it. Then Asher reached into his coat pocket. "I have something," he said. Betty's heart leapt. From his small fingers emerged a scuffed silver audio recorder. "It was for school a long time ago," he said. "But Mom gave it back to me the day we ran. She told me, just in case." He pressed play. At first, static crackled, then voices. Michelle's, soft but tense. "Greg, please. The kids don't feel safe." Then Greg's voice, slurred and full of venom. "You take those kids from me again and I swear next time I won't miss." A few gasps. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. The judge's expression shifted. He asked for the recording to be replayed. Everyone listened again, this time even more intently. When it ended, Betty looked at Patricia. Her face was pale, but her eyes were hopeful. Greg's lawyer scrambled to object, but the judge silenced him with a glance. For a moment, he just sat, there folding his hands, staring at the bench in front of him. Finally his voice returned, measured, low but firm. "I believe we've heard enough." He stood, stepped away and disappeared into chambers. The silence that followed felt like the longest pause in the world. Betty reached for Asher, pulling him into her arms, tears slipping down her cheek. No one said it aloud yet, but they knew everything was about to change. Weeks later, Easter morning arrived beneath a sky brushed with soft blue and streaks of sunlight. Inside Betty's home, the air buzzed not with silence, but with giggles, clinks of spoons, and the joyful mess of craft supplies scattered across the kitchen table. Kimberly, now calling herself just Kim, her own little declaration of growing up, dipped her fingers into blue dye, laughing as she smeared it onto a hard-boiled egg and accidentally onto her nose. Asher concentrated with quiet focus, lining up his eggs like soldiers, each painted with care. Betty stood at the stove again, flipping pancakes like she had that first morning, the same shape, the same syrup swirl. But this time, it wasn't about comfort. It was celebration. The doorbell rang. Asher dashed to open it, and there stood Patricia holding a manila envelope and wearing the softest smile Betty had ever seen on her. "It's official," Patricia said, stepping inside. Betty blinked. "It is? You're their legal guardian now. Papers are filed, everything's sealed. They're yours, Betty, for good." The envelope passed between them, but Betty didn't look inside. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she turned toward the kitchen, where the children now stared up with wide, waiting eyes. "Well?" Asher asked, barely breathing. Betty knelt down, opening her arms. "You're home, sweetheart. For good." Kim launched herself forward first, then Asher wrapped his arms around both of them. Patricia watched quietly, then slipped away with a nod, giving them the moment. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in amber and gold, the three sat together on the front porch. Kimberly hugged her stuffed bunny close, her voice soft. "Do you think Mom knows?" Betty didn't hesitate. "I think she does, and I think she's proud of both of you." Asher leaned his head on her shoulder, the last rays of the sun catching in his hair. Betty closed her eyes for a moment. Life had taken more than its fair share from her. But in loving again, in risking again, she had found something deeper than healing. She had found purpose. She had found family. And in the quiet heart of a broken Easter, something new had been born. Hope. Months passed, as seasons turned the trees outside Betty's house from green to gold, then to bare silhouettes against winter skies. But inside, warmth never left. It lived in Saturday morning pancakes, in sidewalk, chalk drawings, in bedtime songs sung softly by a voice that had once forgotten it could sing. One rainy afternoon, Kimberly sat at the kitchen table, carefully writing something with her tongue sticking out in concentration. Asher watched over her shoulder, arms crossed, pretending not to care, but checking every word. Betty walked in with warm cocoa and smiled. "What are you two working on?" Kim turned the paper around, proudly. At the top it read, "To our Mom from heaven." "We're writing her letters," Asher said, his voice quiet but steady. Just so she knows we're okay. Betty sat beside them, heart full. We tell her about school, Kimberly added, and about you. Asher looked up. We told her you love us like she did. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the window. Betty reached for a pen. Mind if I write one too? She asked. Two little heads nodded eagerly, so the three of them sat together, writing to a woman they had loved in different ways, one through memory, two through stories, all through gratitude. And though the letters would never be mailed, never be stamped or folded into envelopes they didn't need to be, some messages are carried not by post, but by hearts still beating, by lives still growing, by love that refuses to fade. That day, as the clouds parted and the sun returned through the window, Betty knew. She hadn't just gained two children, she had gained a legacy. And Michelle, wherever she was, could rest, knowing her children had found home. If this story touched your heart like it touched ours, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every week we share stories that remind us of the power of love, resilience, and human kindness. Join our little corner of hope. We'd love to have you with us.